Orion is really well placed in the night sky right now, above my deck. And just to the left of that is Monoceros, which is where Caldwell 49 and 50 live, also known as the Rosetta Nebula and Cluster. Earlier in the evening, I was just looking around on my the app on my phone, the Stellarium, just trying to figure out what I wanted to look at, and these looked interesting. And so I pointed the telescope over there, saw that they were surprisingly bright and easy to see, even through the haze of the Bortle skies that I live in. So I was like, yeah, this is going to be good. We'll give this a shot. I started out by drawing a larger than usual circle just to try and see if I could get a lot of the detail in. And I'm doing something a little bit new with technique as well, in terms of just trying to place out all of the stars with a pencil first. So right now I'm just plotting out through all of the primary stars that I'm seeing in the eyepiece. You can't really see the pencil marks super well on the page here. They work better at different angles with the glare, So I was able to see all of the spots, but it was generally fairly lightly drawn in there. Just something to help me figure out exactly where they should all go and be able to erase them easily, as opposed to putting down those white dots and then having such a house erasing those. And I found that this worked really well because, for one, it made me go a little bit faster with all of my placements because I knew that I could adjust quickly. And then secondly, being able to erase them like that so easily was made it a lot simpler to make those adjustments and get the placement a little bit more accurate than usual. With any kind of star placements too, generally I find that I don't really have to worry too much about uh, night vision, so I'm using the amber light a little bit more for that kind of stuff. As I started out on the sketching tonight as well, I had my APM UFF 30 millimeter eyepiece in the Daub, the 10-inch Daub, but I also threw in a UHC filter to try and get some more of the details of the nebula. And even though right now I started on with the star placement, and any of these filters do pull down the light enough that you don't see all of them, because I was focusing just on the primary stars right now, the brighter ones, it didn't really worry me too much that I was losing out on some of those dimmer ones. In some ways, it actually made it a little bit easier to just focus my attention on those primaries. Um, just slowing down the video right here to show a little bit of the individual star placements. But for the most part, I'll be zooming through this stuff because it tends to get a little tedious when you're just looking at dots and then long pauses while I'm staring into the telescope. Uh, just a little bit about the Rosetta Nebula and cluster. They have a couple different names. The NGC, there's a bunch of different NGC numbers for this object as well, and all the different little parts. But in general, Caldwell 49, which is NGC 2237, which generally denotes the entire nebula and all of the stars that are sort of within this area. And then Caldwell 50, which is what I originally started thinking I was going to sketch because I wasn't sure if I was going to, how much of the nebula I was going to be able to see. And that's NGC 2244. It's also called the satellite open cluster, and it's kind of rests in the middle of the nebula. That's what was my main goal as I was going through here in the beginning. But as I was moving forward with drawing out all the stars, my eyes were adapting, and I was really starting to see that I could make out quite a bit of the nebula, which ended up taking a good amount of time to plot out. So starting out with the nebula, since it is so vast and large, I thought I would do a bit of an outline. It was very clear to me in the eyepiece that there was this sort of dark lane going through the center of it. So the first two kind of lines that I drew through there were just to help delineate that space. And then using the side of the smudge tool filled with Conte right here, just lightly going over the areas that I found to help delineate kind of the general shape of the nebula. I'm spending a little bit of time just trying to figure out where the brighter parts are and where everything fades off, and laying it on thick, knowing that once I start smudging it down, it's really going to lighten up a lot. I found that with this Conte shavings like this, it's nice to get a general feel of everything through here and kind of just lay it on super heavy. Um, it allows you to kind of define that shape and the bright and dark spaces really well before moving on into the more detailed stuff. And after getting that broad shapes down, this is something I've been doing for the past couple sketches of nebula, where I'll just take the tip of the smudge tool and do these sort of S shapes and circles and kind of breaking it up a little bit. I mainly do this when I feel like I'm seeing kind of patchiness or sort of like that fading in and fading out within the nebula. And it just gives a little bit of texture to the overall. So now that that's in, taking the clean side of the smudge tool and lightly along the edge of it, just smearing everything down, getting things a little bit more into the hue that the final image is going to be. So this is also the first pass I'm going to do with the Conte and the smudge tool. It's sort of an even pass, even though there are some kind of brighter and darker areas. It's mainly meant to give the general shape of the nebula and to define just in general where kind of those thicker, brighter areas are versus the lighter or the darker ones. This helps just give a blueprint for the entire nebula, and I can also use the brighter spots to help delineate where I'm going to put my second layer in of Conte to really pop those other areas and give depth. So moving through the nebula stuff in particular is pretty hard to get right with just the red light. You don't see the contrast that you're going to see when you're in the daylight. So I like to switch over once I get all the layers down and I get the sense of what it's going to look like. I'll switch over to my to the amber lights, a little bit brighter, something a little bit more natural, so I can see what I'm doing. And in this case, this is the second layer of the Conte that I'm putting down, really just to help give that extra depth to the overall nebula. Turning off all the lights again because I just killed my night vision. I just wanted some time to like really soak in the view again, make sure that I was seeing things correctly, and then popping back the red lights on just to make sure. And when I was looking through the eyepiece, I could tell that there were some more specific bits of the dark lanes that I wasn't really getting in there. So using the eraser, kind of marking out a few more of those spots through there and really trying to define what I just saw in the eyepiece. At this point, it felt like the nebula was in the right spot and felt right to me. So I took out the high contrast filter and went at getting some of the light, the dimmer stars into the sketch. So switching over also to my pen that has like the diluted white ink in there so that it'll leave fainter stars. I tend to be a little bit haphazard about like my star placement just in terms of like where I start on the page and where I end. It's one of the things that I feel like every time I'm halfway through and I'm like, dang it, which sections have I put stars in and which ones haven't I keep thinking to myself, I really got to just like have a method of like starting in the top left and going the bottom right or something, because I always find that I do get a little bit lost, and it's always a little bit worrisome when it's like, did I get all the stars in there? Do I really want to go back and double check all these areas and that kind of thing? As I was putting in a lot of these more faint stars now with the filter off the eyepiece, I was also noticing that there was a ton going on right in the center. I kept getting fleeting glimpses of lots and lots of stars in there that with the 30 millimeter eyepiece, even though the APM UFF is really nice, it still wasn't enough for me to like really get all of it in there. So I took a little bit of time to take a break from the drawing because that first section was about an hour of sketching. And then I pulled out this Antares 5.7 millimeter eyepiece. It has like a 70-degree apparent field of view, which is great because like even though you're zoomed in, you get this wider view. Um, the eyepiece is one that I picked up with a bunch of other eyepieces about 6, 8 months ago, and it's not very great with bright objects like planets and things like that. But I've found that it works pretty well for pulling in a lot of light on dimmer stuff. And so I've been using this lately to get in those more subtle stars and the details that I'm seeing within open clusters and things like that. And so that's what I've got in the telescope here for this last section of really just going through and trying to focus primarily on the open cluster in the center and getting all the details and specificity of like where all these magnitude 12, 13, 14 stars are. Actually, I don't know if I could see any magnitude 14, but it's definitely 11 and 12 were definitely popping out enough to sketch down. As I'm starting to get a little closer to the end of the sketch here, I'm just switching back and forth between pens a little bit, getting the fully saturated ink here to accent some of those brighter stars that felt like they weren't quite bright enough when I'm looking at the overall composition in the eyepiece. Yeah, I got to say, like that fountain pen that I was just using, Twisby Eco, I believe it is. It's a really nice fountain pen, but I've been finding that, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's been bleeding a lot on me with the white ink in there. So I'm going to have to figure that out because it's horrible when you're doing a sketch and then a big blob of white ink plops down. Um, so yeah, overall the sketch I think at this point is pretty much done. It took about an hour and a half in whole to get the entire sketch in there because it was so large and there was a lot of detail within the nebula. But it was also extremely fun to sketch this sucker out. After that, in the evening, I switched over and did a little bit of sketching in Leo, M105, and NGC 3384. I couldn't quite make out the third galaxy that's over there, NGC 3389. But it was a nice little way to end the night, and I'll probably throw that video up in the future.